This is Felicity Fae, the crazy travelling fairy. Now this morning it's about 6 o'clock in the morning and I am standing on top of Glastonbury Tor, nearly at the top of Glastonbury Tor, which is one of the most sacred sites in all of England. So let's have a little look at Glastonbury Tor. Here it is. Now Glastonbury Tor is situated on the Michael and Mary ley line, so two ley lines cross over here and you can see the tower, which is the remains of a ruined church that a very long time ago was on top. One of the really amazing things about Glastonbury Tor is way back in the old days when Glastonbury used to be part of Wales, the Glastonbury Tor was famous for being the entrance to Annwn. So Annwn is the Welsh kingdom of the underworld. The dead resided there, and also the fairies. Interesting thing about Celtic mythology is that the fairies and the dead tend to reside in the same place. And the king of the underworld was called Gwyn ap Nudd. He used to ride out, well he still does, on October the 31st every year with the Wild Hunt. So the Wild Hunt were a team of sky dogs that flew across the sky, and they had red ears and lolling tongues and very scary red eyes, and Gwyn ap Nudd would ride across the sky with this team of dogs and chase all of the spirits, all of the dead, and bring them back to the underworld into Annwn, which, as I was saying, was underneath Glastonbury Tor. One of the most gorgeous mythologies about Glastonbury Tor are the mythologies for the Arthurian legend. So that's the story of King Arthur, and Glastonbury Tor is featured in the stories of King Arthur for absolutely centuries, which is very interesting. But the story's been retold in many ways, and none of the retellings are wrong because it's a mythology and you can elaborate on that as much as you like. But one of the popular modern retellings is called The Mist of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Brady. And what she's done is she's made the Arthurian legends kind of a battle, I guess, between the old pagan religion and the modern emerging religion of Christianity, which obviously overtook England a little bit later. And she's really focused on Glastonbury Tor. So the name Glastonbury comes from the Isle of Glass, which is another name for this area, because quite a long time ago, the Somerset Levels, which is what Glastonbury Tor rises up from, would have been covered with an inland sea. So this whole area would have been some kind of swampland, and the Tor was a big, beautiful hill rising out of it. So in Marion Zimmer Bradley's book, The Mist of Avalon, there's some absolutely lovely scenes where Morgan Le Fay and her mentor Vivian are coming to Glastonbury through on a boat through some misty, murky waters. And the name The Mist of Avalon comes from that mist, and the idea that the priestesses had to know the way through the mist. They had to be able to part the mists to get to the sacred Isle of Avalon. And one of the main things that this book does focus on is a truth, really, and an idea that all these sacred pagan sites, and there are so many of them all the way through the UK and Brittany, the Christians came along, and when they found these sacred pagan sites, they tended to build churches on top of them. So particularly in Cornwall, actually, there's some churches right next to sacred yew trees, holy wells and things like that, and that is because the Christians wanted to convert all the pagans. So the best way that they could do this was to put their shrines and their buildings and their churches on the sacred pagan sites, and then hope that the people would still come there to worship. And that's why a lot of these churches have very pagan symbols carved into them, such as wooden gargoyles and dragons and the Green Man even. Now, the Holy Grail is something that popped up in Arthurian legends, And there is a beautiful story where the Knights of the Round Table, because they're bored and not much is happening, and they haven't got any damsels in distress to save, and there's no wars in the kingdom because Arthur's united the kingdom, all decide that they're going to go on a quest to find this Holy Grail. And once they do find the Holy Grail, it's hidden again. So if you want to, you can still go on a quest for this particular sacred cup. Now, what fascinates me is actually the Holy Grail mythology comes from a far, far older story, a pagan story, which is actually about the cauldron of the Dagda. So the Dagda is the king of fairyland. Again, he's a different king of fairyland. He comes from the Irish mythology of the fairy kingdom, the Tuatha De Danann. Don't copy my pronunciation on that, I hope I'm saying that correctly. But yes, so the Tuatha De Danann were an Irish race of fairy people, and they were expelled from Ireland when the Milesians came over to Ireland, and there was a very big war. And there is the story that, of course, the fairy people went and lived in the hollow hills, so they lived underground. And actually the ancient people of the British Isles really believed that fairies haunted all the barrows and earthworks. So I'm not sure if they understood that the barrows were the burial sites of the very, very ancient Britons, or you know, where they got this idea from, that they believed that the fairy people had gone and moved into the hollow hills. So these fairy people, the Tuatha De Danann, expelled. A lot of them left Ireland and they came over to Wales particularly, and back in those days, of course, Glastonbury, the Isle of Glass, was part of Wales. So they came here to Glastonbury Tor. So this fairy king from Ireland, the Dagda, he came over here with his subjects, who were named the people of Danu, so that's after the goddess Danu, the Tuatha De Danann, and he brought them here to reside in the hollow hills, particularly, of course, inside Glastonbury Tor, which, as I said before, is the Welsh kingdom of the fairies and the dead, called Annwn. So the Dagda brought them here, and with him he brought the sacred cauldron. Now the Dagda's cauldron was really quite incredible because it had the power of bringing the dead back to life. So it was one of the four sacred items, I guess, that the fairy people had, this cauldron, and you could resurrect an entire army with it if you wanted to and go back out to war. So it had the powers of healing and the powers of reincarnation. So this is a very, very, very old story, and it's actually where the mythology of the Holy Grail originally comes from. And one of the very, very, very earliest Arthurian legends is actually about King Arthur himself with some of his knights coming here to Glastonbury Tor and going into the Welsh underworld, and his adventures in the Welsh underworld trying to get this cauldron. That story of the Grail being hidden here in Glastonbury Tor, well, it's an interesting one, because some people do believe that Jesus came to Glastonbury and Joseph of Arimathea, and of course there is a holy thorn tree on Wiriel Hill, which is on the other side of Glastonbury, where Joseph of Arimathea was supposed to have planted his staff, and the staff budded and grew into a thorn tree. So, you know, there is a reason why people do believe that the Holy Grail could reside here. But on the whole, I certainly am of the opinion that these legends come from the cauldron of the Fairy King. Another one of the legends associated with Glastonbury Tor is the story of an abbot from Glastonbury Abbey who was invited to dinner by the Fairy King to his palace inside the Tor. So the abbot came along to this dinner, obviously very suspicious as to why the Fairy King wanted to invite him to come along there. And the Fairy King did have a plan. He intended to trick the abbot by giving him food in the fairy kingdom. So if you're in fairyland and you eat or drink any of the wonderful divine delicacies that that place has to offer, you're going to be stuck in fairyland forever. It's very much like the Greek mythology where Persephone eats 6 pomegranate seeds and she has to reside for 6 months a year ever after with Hades in the underworld because she's partaken of the food of the underworld. So the mythology of the fairy kingdom is much the same. If you eat food in the fairy kingdom, the fairies have this hold over you. So that was the intention of the Fairy King. He invited the abbot there to try and feed him some fairy food, but the abbot had his own plan. And what he did after pretending to eat dinner and having a nice chat with the Fairy King is he pulled some holy water out of his robes, splashed it all over the Fairy King and the Fairy King's castle, and supposedly vanquished him forever. So that's the story, that the fairies have been vanquished now from Glastonbury Tor and they're no longer here. So here we are on top of Glastonbury Tor, early morning on Midsummer's Day. Not early enough to catch the ritual that would have happened here. There would have been a beautiful pagan ritual when the sun rose and lots of drumming and cheering and magic, but as you can see, it still has a very festive atmosphere and everybody's having a great time. So here we have the tower that was once part of a church, probably I'd say called St Michael's Church, because we're on the St Michael ley line here, and what's really interesting is there are a lot of churches all named St Michael's Church on the Michael ley line going across Europe, one of those being the one at the top of Mont Saint-Michel in France, and of course St Michael's Mound in Cornwall. So this here is a little bit of information about Glastonbury Tor which I've been reading, and it's quite interesting. It particularly focuses on the Christian history of the place, and it says here that a head of a cross has been found on this tour, and also some remains of what were probably Christian monk cells cut into the rocks on the summit. So that's really quite special and definite evidence. But another thing that's really interesting about the tour is it actually has these kind of cuts along it, like a man-made pathway going up in levels. So at the moment, because the grass is quite long, actually it's really hard to see at the moment, but there are definite cuts. You can see them really well in photographs from the air, and there's a lot of conjecture about why those cuts would be there. One of the things that people have come up with is that perhaps it was an ancient druidic or tribal meeting place, and that the druids or you know, high priests of the tribe came from all over the Somerset levels and met on this hill. I'm going to pop back into town now and go and enjoy some of the amazing events going on in the centre of Glastonbury on Midsummer's Day. It's free entry to the Sacred Chalice Well, which is wonderful, and the White Spring as well will probably be open today, which is one of my favourite places here, and it being directly below Glastonbury Tor, the White Spring, I can really feel the male Fairy King energy in there. But I just want to leave you with a little bit of a thought, which is about Morgan Le Fay and the Arthurian legends. So for me, one of the beautiful things about the Arthurian legends and the quest to the Holy Grail is it is actually the cauldron of the Dagda. So it's a vessel for reincarnation of the spirit, and even though the Holy Grail morphed into the Christian cup that caught Christ's blood, it's still a story about the spirit being resurrected, I guess, in a beautiful way. So in the end of the Mists of Avalon, King Arthur is brought here by his sister Morgan Le Fay, and legend has it that he comes here to the Isle of Avalon for an eternal sleep. Morgan Le Fay heals his wounds, and instead of dying, King Arthur falls into an eternal sleep to be resurrected in England or in Britain's hour of need. So he resides maybe somewhere here in Glastonbury Tor, and in this great hour of need, with his wounds healed by this holy cauldron or Grail, he will rise again and save the country from imminent destruction.